You're not the only one searching for answers. There's something in the universe, in people, in failures, in encounters, that's also trying to find you. But this encounter doesn't happen through words. It comes in the form of signs, unlikely coincidences, small situations that hit you in a way you can't quite explain. Jung called this synchronicity. Synchronicity isn't just coincidence. It's when the soul chooses to manifest, using reality as a mirror. And when you understand what's really behind those events that just happen, life stops being a string of random occurrences and starts to feel like an intimate conversation between you and something greater. In this video, you'll understand the true role of synchronicity in your life, and not in a mystical or fantastical way, but in a deep, real, and transformative one. Watch until the end, because when you see this clearly, even the most painful moments in your story will start to make sense. And if this kind of content speaks to you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Have you ever felt like a meeting, a phrase, or even a seemingly trivial delay happened for a bigger reason? Something in you knew it wasn't just coincidence. It was as if life found a way to tell you something, but without using words. Maybe it was a book left behind on a park bench with the exact title you needed to read, or someone who showed up out of nowhere to point you toward a path you hadn't seen before. It could have even been a loss, a mistake, a failure, that, over time, pushed you exactly where you needed to be. These moments, as subtle as they may seem, carry a force that logic alone can't explain. They touch something inside, a kind of memory you don't remember having, but that suddenly makes perfect sense. You feel it. It's as if the world, just for a moment, answered something your soul had been asking. That's synchronicity. When an external event aligns with an internal state in a way so meaningful, it can't just be chance. It's not superstition. It's the soul trying to speak through reality. It's the unconscious manifesting itself through encounters, images, and living symbols. And when you notice this happening, everything shifts. Life stops being cold randomness and becomes a silent, yet deeply intimate conversation. Jung knew not every sign is synchronicity, but when it is, you feel it. It's not the kind of thing you can prove with numbers, but it's also not something you can honestly deny. And in those moments, a question begins to echo. What if the thing that found me was also looking for me? Maybe you're going through a confusing phase, filled with uncertainty or forced pauses. Maybe you're trying to understand why certain doors aren't opening, or why certain people are showing up right now, at this point in your journey. None of it is random, but it's not simple either. Because what's trying to reveal itself might still need you to slow down, listen to yourself, and pay attention. Maybe you can't quite understand everything that's going on, but there's something real beneath the surface of the chaos. And when you start to listen, the world begins to speak, in a subtle way, in a way that touches you and transforms. As you start listening to life's signals, something else needs to be tuned within you: discernment. Because not everything that happens carries a hidden meaning. And at the same time, not everything is just random. Jung was very cautious about this. He recognized that some coincidences are just that: random encounters, without emotional weight, without any real connection to what's going on inside us. But when an external experience seems to directly respond to what you're going through internally, when it resonates, when it stirs something in you, then maybe it's not just coincidence. Maybe it's synchronicity. The difference is in the impact. A synchronicity doesn't go unnoticed. It stops you. It creates an inner jolt, or an unexpected calm. It might move you to tears or leave you speechless. You feel like it's meant for you. And it doesn't matter if the person next to you sees nothing special. The sign isn't collective. It's personal. It comes loaded with subjectivity. It fits precisely where you are emotionally. And that's where the danger of confusion lies. Because when we're craving meaning, anything can look like a sign. The mind starts shaping things to fit what it wants to see, not necessarily what's really happening. That's why Jung said synchronicity is only valid when it touches a real layer of the psyche, when it's connected to an authentic internal process, not a fleeting desire or a fantasy of control. The key isn't chasing signs everywhere. It's noticing what truly hits you. It's asking yourself honestly, did this affect me? Did this move me or challenge me? If the answer is yes, then maybe there's something there worth exploring. Maybe it's a message from the unconscious. Not an oracle, not a prophecy, but a symbolic response. A chance to see yourself more clearly. Not everything that glows is light, but sometimes the tiniest spark is enough to show you you're not lost. You just need to look differently. and trust that where there's emotional truth, there might also be direction. Noticing what really hits you takes more than attention. It takes presence. Because signs don't scream, they whisper. And the problem is that most of us have learned to live in noise. Mental, emotional, digital. We're so busy chasing answers that we forget to quiet down and actually hear them. Jung understood that the unconscious doesn't force itself. It suggests, it invites. But if you're always in do mode, always trying to control or explain everything rationally, it'll be hard to catch these invitations. Synchronicity doesn't happen just because you want it to. It happens when you're available. And that availability is openness. It's a kind of inner listening that doesn't force life to fit into a plan but allows it to reveal itself as it truly is. When you quiet down, even internally, the world starts to feel different. Small details stand out. Intuitions that once seemed trivial begin to carry weight. And most importantly, you realize that life was never silent. You were just too distracted to hear it. It's like tuning an old radio. The signals were always in the air, but you only start to hear them clearly when you turn the dial gently, with sensitivity. The right frequency isn't loud. It's precise. It resonates. And when you find it, there's a strange peace, like something clicked into place without effort. This kind of listening takes courage, because as you become more sensitive, you also become more vulnerable. But it's in that vulnerability that the soul starts to show itself. You begin to live in a more symbolic, more intuitive way. Things keep happening out there, but now they gain meaning in here. And slowly, a new kind of trust begins to grow. A trust that doesn't rely on guarantees, but on a living experience of connection. You begin to see that there's intelligence in the encounters, that there's wisdom in the pauses, and that even in the most confusing moments there's a kind of invisible coherence that only reveals itself when you stop fighting and start listening. This silent listening that begins to open within you is not rational. It's not about decoding things with logic. The unconscious doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, images, atmospheres, and perhaps most powerfully, it speaks through encounters. Jung saw the unconscious as a living, autonomous intelligence that wants to express itself. And when we don't hear its whispers in dreams, it tries to reach us through everyday life. People, situations, repeated phrases, recurring patterns, all of these can be symbolic expressions. And often, the unconscious doesn't just want to be interpreted. It wants to be recognized. That's why certain events hit you in a way that's hard to explain. They don't make logical sense, but they make emotional sense. They bring something to the surface. They can provoke unexpected tears, chills, a quiet that forces you to pause. Because they're not just facts, they're messages, and not always pleasant ones. The unconscious isn't concerned with your comfort. It's concerned with your wholeness. What shows up outside is sometimes exactly what you've been avoiding inside. And when something weird happens, something off-script, something that throws you off, it might be exactly where transformation lies. It's not randomness getting in your way. It's randomness trying to show you what you haven't seen yet. These symbolic encounters, when lived with presence, act like mirrors. They don't come to confirm your certainties. They come to reveal your shadows, awaken memories, or simply break the rigid logic you've been trying to use to run your life. It's the unconscious saying, look again, but look with an open heart. And it's in that kind of gaze that synchronicity gains power, because it doesn't demand immediate interpretation. It demands surrender, the willingness to accept that not everything needs to be understood right now, but everything can be felt truthfully, and that by opening yourself to these symbolic encounters, you come closer not only to answers, but to yourself. Symbolic encounters don't always come as gentle gifts. Sometimes they show up as ruptures, as something that seemed to be going right and suddenly falls apart, as someone who disappoints you, a path that closes, a plan that doesn't unfold, and your first reaction is almost always pain, rejection, anger. But what if that's exactly where the real sign is? There's a part of the soul that only matures when something the ego deeply wanted simply doesn't happen. Not because you did something wrong, but because maybe it wasn't in tune with who you're becoming. Jung understood that the psyche seeks integration, not just fulfillment. And that means life sometimes needs to interrupt a desire to bring you back to what truly matters. When you're frustrated, the unconscious might be redirecting you. When you lose something, it might be protecting you from what you still can't see. It's not punishment. It's coherence. It's the soul's process, which follows a different logic from society's. And this demands a difficult kind of trust. The belief that even what hurts might carry meaning, that even what feels like delay might actually be alignment. Of course, that doesn't justify everything. Not all pain is fair, not every loss is a sign. But when there's a deep emotional impact, when something forces you to rethink everything, maybe the universe isn't working against you, maybe it's working for you, on a larger scale, one that's still unfolding. In those moments, synchronicity doesn't arrive as a miracle. It arrives as a disruption. It cuts through illusion, dismantles expectation, and reveals a part of you that hadn't had a voice. And over time, you realize that painful no from the past created space for a more truthful yes to show up later. Not right away, but in the right time, in the soul's time. Because when life aligns with your inner process, it rarely gives you what you want right away. It first gives you what you need to become the kind of person who can hold what truly matters. And that doesn't always come wrapped in beauty. Sometimes it comes as loss, silence, or frustration. But when you start to see what it taught you, you realize you gained something. Even in the pain, you gained. Some signs don't come to confirm what you already knew. They come to dismantle everything you thought you knew. They shatter certainties. They tear down plans. And at first, they seem like mistakes from the universe. But with time, and some courage to look, you begin to understand. They're disguised liberations. Not every synchronicity comes as a gentle revelation. Sometimes, it shows up as a no that forces you to let go. A love that doesn't unfold. A project that seems perfect, but stalls. An opportunity that slips through your fingers by seconds. And you wonder, why now? Why like this? Maybe it's because you were pushing for a path that wasn't yours. Or maybe you were ready for something bigger, but still clinging to what felt safe. And so life, in its strange wisdom, closes the door you most wanted to open, not out of cruelty, but out of coherence. Because the ego asks for what's familiar, but the soul answers to what's true. Jung understood this. He spoke about the danger of projecting our desires too much onto the world, expecting everything to unfold the way the ego imagines. And when it doesn't, we feel frustration. But that frustration, when looked at honestly, can become a turning point, because it reveals where we were blind, where we were forcing, where we needed to let go. There's freedom in that kind of refusal. Freedom from a script that no longer fits. Freedom to realize it wasn't that yes you needed, but the empty space it would leave behind. And in that space, something new can begin. Something that isn't born from your will, but from your listening. Synchronicity, in that sense, isn't a reward or punishment. It's adjustment. It's a deep answer to a question you might not even know you were asking. And when it shows up as a no, it shows up to set you free. Free from the role you were trying to maintain. Free from the story that no longer represents you. And clearing the path so you can walk with more truth. Yes, it hurts. But the kind of pain that reveals is different from the kind that paralyzes. The first has meaning. The second doesn't. And when you start to see that difference, something in you shifts. You stop fighting reality and start walking with it, even when it pushes you away from what seemed ideal. Because deep down, you feel it wasn't the end. It was the beginning in disguise. Sometimes the sign you need doesn't come through beauty or wonder. It comes through discomfort, through the person who confronts you, through the offhand comment, through the situation that shakes you up and leaves you wondering, why did this hit me so hard? Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can help us understand ourselves. Not because the other person is right, but because the disproportionate reaction reveals something still hidden inside us. The shadow, the unseen part, the denied part. And that's where synchronicity can work in a less obvious but deeper way. It also appears as friction. Irritation in this sense isn't just discomfort. It's a mirror. Something the world shows you, unfiltered, so you can see what you still don't want to face. A judgment that stings might touch your insecurity. A rejection might reveal your dependency. Someone else's mistake might reflect a part of you that you're still trying too hard to control. And it's not easy to face that, because the first impulse is to blame the other, to escape the feeling, to rationalize. But when you start paying attention to what the discomfort wants to show you, something opens up. You realize it's not punishing you. It's provoking you. It's calling you to grow. The synchronicity that provokes is just as powerful as the one that enchants, because it reveals the unresolved zones. It shows where wounds are still open. And with courage, it offers the chance to heal them. But for that, you have to step out of the victim role. You have to ask yourself, what is this showing me about myself? And the answer doesn't always come easily. Sometimes it arrives slowly, in the days that follow, when the dust settles and your soul digests the impact. But it comes, and when it does, it transforms. The irritation stops being just wear and tear. It becomes a sign, and you start to be grateful even for the stumbles, because they snapped you out of autopilot and brought you back into contact with who you really are. It takes maturity to see wisdom in friction, but once you reach that point, everything becomes material for awareness. Even pain, even anger, even that uncomfortable encounter you wanted to avoid. Because deep down, the universe doesn't want to please you. It wants to wake you up. After so many provocations, there are moments when life speaks clearly, through a calm but firm impulse, almost like a silent push from within. It's when the soul says, go. You don't have all the answers. You're not in control. But something in you knows it's time to move, to say yes, to change course, or simply to trust. That feeling doesn't come with anxiety. On the contrary, true intuition is calm. It's simple. It doesn't argue, it doesn't shout, it doesn't pressure. It presents itself as a silent conviction. And when you listen with your whole body, you feel peace. Jung distinguished between instinct and intuition, but saw both as legitimate expressions of the psyche. Instinct protects, intuition guides, and often, they work together when the soul needs to make decisions the mind can't explain. A non-rational yes, but deeply coherent. An inner movement that, when honored, opens unexpected paths. It's common to ignore that calling because it doesn't fit the plan, or because it seems too irrational. But synchronicity doesn't always follow linear logic. It shows up in unlikely meetings, in sudden decisions that later make perfect sense, in paths you didn't even know you wanted, until you walked them. And the closer you get to yourself, the stronger that intuition becomes. Not because you've become more spiritual, but because you've become more honest with yourself. The soul doesn't speak to those who pretend. It reveals itself to those who listen with truth. And often, that listening happens in the body. A shiver, a tension that releases, a tiredness that disappears the moment you decide. It's the body confirming what the soul already knew. Trusting this movement is a practice, because the ego wants guarantees, but the self wants wholeness. And sometimes that means moving forward without knowing exactly where it will lead, just knowing that this next step is the right one now, and that's enough. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to be fully present in your next step. When the soul speaks, it doesn't demand certainty. It offers direction. And over time, you learn to trust that kind of silence that, deep down, is already an answer. As you open up to listening to yourself, something curious starts to happen. The world around you begins to respond with subtle movements. People who show up at the exact right moment. An unexpected invitation. A line in a book that feels like it was written just for you. As if life were seeking you while you seek it. Jung said that as you search for the self also moves toward you. It's as if, by taking the first step toward your essence, a greater intelligence starts organizing the path. This isn't about magic, it's about resonance. When you're aligned with your inner process, the outside world begins to reflect that alignment. And the most beautiful part is that these encounters aren't forced. They happen when you stop chasing what should be and start living what is. It's in that state of presence that the new finds space to enter, that the unexpected can become revelation. Many times what you need isn't to run faster, it's to become available. And that availability is born when you begin to trust that not everything depends on your effort, that there's a part of life that responds to your surrender, not your control. And that response comes through paths your willpower alone could never create. You don't need to manipulate reality to receive what makes sense. You just need to be awake. Because when you're awake, you recognize, you see the sign. You notice the value of a simple encounter, of a phrase said in passing, of a coincidence that strikes a chord. None of this is predictable, but it's profoundly coherent. Because deep down, you're not just trying to reach a destination, you're being called. And that calling manifests when there's real listening, when there's presence, and when there's courage to let yourself be found. You're not alone on this path. There's something greater moving with you, something that can't be seen, but can be felt. And when you feel it, you understand. What you seek with an open heart is already, in some way, moving toward you too. By now, maybe you've realized, the events in your life aren't as random as they once seemed. There's a kind of invisible thread connecting the moments, the people, the places, and that thread isn't made of logic, but of meaning, of deep significance. The unconscious, as Jung described it, is a living reality. And like all living things, it moves. And when it moves, it finds a mirror in the world. The unconscious doesn't speak directly to consciousness. It needs a bridge. And that bridge is often everyday life. A symbol in a movie, a piece of music that moves you, a conversation overheard by chance. All of these can serve as reflections of something manifesting within. Life becomes a symbolic surface, where what was hidden gains form. That's why certain situations repeat. Certain patterns come back. Not because you're cursed, but because something inside you hasn't been seen deeply enough. The world keeps showing you because the soul insists on being heard. And when you begin to see events through this symbolic lens, something changes. Not what happens, but how you interpret it. Randomness stops being an unpredictable enemy and becomes a tool for revelation. It's not that everything has a deep meaning, but many things do, and they've been going unnoticed. The unconscious needs the material of life to express itself. It shows up through the external, but always in harmony with what's being gestated internally. And this dance between the inner and outer is what makes synchronicity so powerful. It's the moment when the mirror precisely reflects what the soul is trying to say. You don't need to decode everything. You don't need to turn every event into a theory. But you can start asking yourself with sincerity, why did this move me? Or, what is this repetition trying to show me? Even just those questions shift your state of presence. And where there's presence, there's the possibility of integration. Because the world around you isn't separate from you. It's part of your process. And the more conscious you become, the clearer it is that chance, when seen through the eyes of the soul, is actually a carefully disguised guidance system. As you grow more sensitive to what moves you, something begins to shift. Not just inside, but outside too. Reality stays the same, but how it responds to you changes. Situations take on new shapes. People arrive with different roles. The timing of things adjusts. And you start to notice that when there's true openness, life opens too. This change doesn't come from expectation. It comes from surrender. Not from crossing your arms and waiting for miracles, but from stopping the push for what doesn't flow. There's a difference between passivity and trust. The first paralyzes. The second allows. And it's in that allowance that synchronicity finds room to act. You're no longer trying to control every step. You're learning to walk with awareness. You're willing to feel, to wait, to act when it's time. And most of all, to listen when the soul says, not yet. That refined listening changes the way you live. The urgency fades. Anxiety quiets down, and in place of control, a kind of trust is born, one that can only be cultivated through practice. And it's precisely when you let go that you begin to receive, not just anything, but what truly makes sense, what resonates with where you are right now, what fits your soul. Sometimes you didn't even know you needed it until it arrived, and when it does, it doesn't come with a rush of excitement. It comes with clarity. With that kind of peace that says, this is it. This kind of experience can't be manufactured. It happens when your inner and outer worlds come into alignment, when you're no longer trying to prove anything or protect yourself from everything. You're simply present, available, receptive. Reality then begins to respond differently, not because it changed, but because you did. You're seeing with new eyes, listening with a different heart. And when that inner shift happens, the world stops being just a backdrop and starts becoming a partner. It's no longer a battlefield. It becomes a space filled with meaning. And then, even without having all the answers, you begin to walk more lightly, because you feel you're no longer alone on the path, and you don't need to be. Life speaks. It always has. Now, you're listening. By now, you may realize that synchronicity isn't something you chase like someone hunting miracles. It's something that reveals itself when the soul awakens. It doesn't show up to confirm theories, but to bring meaning. It doesn't come to feed fantasies, but to remind you that life, even with its pains, has a wisdom that goes beyond logic. What you lived, what moved you, what marked you in ways you can barely explain. None of it was random. It might have felt chaotic, unfair, directionless. But when you start to look with more presence, with deeper listening, you realize there was a deeper thread running through it all, a subtle language, a silent dialogue between the world and your soul. Jung said that for those who are paying attention, the world is like one big dream, and like every dream, it speaks in images, symbols, and sensations. Synchronicity is that language. It doesn't shout, but it leaves a mark. It doesn't explain, but it reveals. It offers no guarantees, but it gives direction, real direction, tangible, rooted in who you truly are. You don't have to become mystical or go around searching for signs in everything. You just need to be awake, open, present. Because synchronicity doesn't happen somewhere else. It happens here, in the ordinary, in everyday life. It shows up in life as it is, with its stumbles and wonders, its delays and encounters, its losses and new beginnings. And that's what changes everything. When you realize that what found you was also looking for you, that life isn't testing you to punish you, but to align you, that the pain, as harsh as it was also a path, that the no's created space, that the hard encounters revealed truths you wouldn't have seen on your own. None of this makes the journey easier, but it makes it more honest. And it's in that honesty that the soul begins to bloom. When you stop chasing explanations and start living with meaning. When you understand that even silence can be an answer, and that yes, the universe speaks, but it speaks to those who are awake. So maybe the greatest answer you can receive won't come from outside. It will come from your own gaze, from the way you've begun to listen to yourself, because it's from that place that everything changes. Not suddenly, but from the inside out. And when that happens, synchronicity stops being the exception. It becomes a language, and life stops being random, and becomes a meeting. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below. I recognize the signs. That phrase shows not only that you watched until the end, but that something in you is beginning to awaken. And if this content truly touched you, and you'd like to support the channel more directly, you can click the thanks button down below. Even the smallest financial support makes a big difference. It helps this work continue, grow, and reach even further. Maybe even as a new sign for someone else who's also searching for meaning. Thank you for being here. See you in the next video.